In the grand ballrooms of Regency London, the moonlit gardens of France, the sun-kissed villas of Italy, and the passionate streets of Spain, love has always found a way. Here, we bring you original historical romance stories filled with passion, sacrifice, and unforgettable destinies. Before tonight's tale begins, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community of romantics from around the world. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Now, settle in and let history whisper its most beautiful secrets. This is Tales of Whispering Hearts. There is a particular cruelty in being seen by the wrong person at the right moment. Not wrong in character, not wrong in heart, wrong only in the accident of birth, in the ordering of things that no one chose and no one can change. The wrong name, the wrong title, the wrong brother. This is the story of Marguerite Fontenay, the Countess de Brissac, and it begins in the way that the most honest and most painful stories always begin, not with a mistake, but with something that felt, at the time, entirely correct. Paris in the spring of 1819 had a quality of recovered lightness, the way a person has lightness after a long illness, grateful, a little fragile, uncertain whether to trust it. The city had been through revolution and empire and restoration in the span of 30 years, and now it was attempting something like ordinary life again. The salons had reopened, the opera was full, the chestnut trees along the boulevards were flowering, and the women of the Faubourg Saint-Germain were wearing new gowns in the new silhouettes, and pretending that the last 3 decades had been a regrettable interlude that was now firmly behind them. Marguerite Fontenay was 26 years old and had been a widow for 2 years. Her husband, the late Comte de Brissac, had been a man of 37 when she married him at 19, not unkind, not ungenerous, but entirely unable to understand her, which had turned out to be its own particular loneliness. He had died of a sudden fever in the winter of 1817 and left her the Brissac townhouse on the Rue du Bac, a moderate income and a freedom she had not expected and did not, initially, know what to do with. She had spent the first year of her widowhood being quietly grateful and feeling guilty about the gratitude. She had spent the second year learning, gradually and with some difficulty, how to take up the space that the marriage had not allowed her. She had her own opinions. She expressed them at dinners. She attended the theatre alone when she wanted to, and declined invitations she found dull, and accepted the ones she found interesting. And she was discovering, with the deliberate attention of someone learning a new language, what it was that she actually liked and wanted, now that she was permitted to find out. She was not looking for love. She was, if anything, slightly suspicious of it, had seen enough of what it looked like when it was also obligation to have reservations about the whole institution. But she was not closed. She was, simply, careful. The Duc de Montclair came into her life in April, at a dinner hosted by the Baron de Seville, who collected interesting people the way other men collected paintings. The Duc was 41, which was 15 years her senior, a widower himself, enormously wealthy, and possessed of the kind of calm authority that certain men develop when they have held power long enough for it to stop being effortful. He was handsome in the settled, substantial way of a man who had been better looking at 30 and was more impressive at 40. He was intelligent and attentive, and spoke to her as though her opinions mattered, which after 7 years of marriage to a man who had largely talked at her, she found deeply affecting. He began calling on her. She received him. He was proper, deliberate, unhurried in the way of a man who has decided what he wants, and is confident enough in his own position not to be frantic about it. By June, it was understood in the circles they moved in that the Duc de Montclair was courting the Comtesse de Brissac, and that the Comtesse did not appear to be discouraging him. She was not discouraging him. She liked him. She respected him. She could see, clearly, the shape of a life with him, comfortable, stimulating, easier than anything she had known before. She was not in love with him, not yet, but she remembered that love was supposed to come with time, and that liking and respecting were decent foundations, and that she had built worse things on less. She was in the process of deciding, carefully, methodically, in the way she did everything since she had learned she was allowed to decide, when she met his younger brother. It happened the way so many things happen, sideways, without announcement, in the middle of something entirely unrelated. The Duc had invited her to attend a concert at Montclair House, the great family residence on the Place Vendôme, in the second week of July. It was a private evening, perhaps 30 guests, an Italian soprano of considerable reputation, a small orchestra. Marguerite arrived with her friend Hélène, the Vicomtesse de Calle, and was shown into the music room, which had the hushed and expectant quality that good rooms always had before music began. She was speaking with Hélène near the window when someone said, behind them, "I believe you are standing in front of the only decent view in this room." She turned. The man standing behind her was younger than the Duc by perhaps 8 or 10 years, 30, or close to it, with the same dark coloring as his brother, but assembled differently, less formal, as though the same materials had been arranged with different priorities in mind. He was not dressed poorly, but he was dressed as if he had not spent very much time thinking about it, which in a room full of people who had spent a great deal of time thinking about it, was itself a kind of statement. He had paint on his left hand, a very small amount, near the knuckle, the kind of thing a careful man would have noticed and removed before arriving at a formal concert, which told her something. His eyes were dark brown, and had in them the quality she had come to associate, in her limited experience, with people who found the world genuinely interesting, rather than merely useful. "The view of the courtyard," she said, and stepped aside to let him see it. He looked at the courtyard for a moment. "Thank you. The fountain is the point of it. My mother had it installed in 1802, and has been right about it ever since, which she mentions with some frequency." Marguerite felt the smile arrive before she'd decided to allow it. "You are the younger Montclair," she said. "Lucien," he said. "And you are the Comtesse de Bressac, who my brother talks about in the sort of careful and deliberate way that tells me he has been thinking about what to say before he says it, which is his highest form of enthusiasm." She looked at him. He said it without malice and without agenda, as a simple and slightly amused observation about his brother's character, and there was nothing in it she could object to, and yet it landed in the room in a way she could not quite account for. "Your brother is very thoughtful," she said. "He is the most thoughtful man I know," Lucien said, with complete sincerity. "He is also the most careful, which is sometimes the same thing, and sometimes not." The music began before she could answer, and they were separated by the movement of guests toward their chairs, and Marguerite sat beside Hélène and listened to the Italian soprano with the surface of her attention, while something underneath it remained, with an inconvenience she immediately noted and filed away as irrelevant, on the conversation by the window and the paint near the knuckle of a man's left hand. She told herself it was curiosity, which was true. She told herself it was nothing more than that, which was less certain. After the concert, during the supper that followed, she found herself twice in conversations where Lucien was also present. Once a discussion about the soprano's technique that she found herself having opinions about, and once near the supper table where he was eating cold chicken with the unceremonious appetite of someone who had forgotten to have lunch, and said when she appeared beside him, "The salmon is better than it looks, if you're deciding." She had not been deciding. She had been trying not to look at him. She took the salmon. On the carriage ride home, Hélène looked at her for a long moment, and then said, with the precision of a woman who had known her for 12 years, "The younger one." "Don't," Marguerite said. "I didn't say anything," Hélène said, which was technically true and entirely dishonest. "His brother is courting me," Marguerite said. "I know," Hélène said. "I was there." They rode the rest of the way in silence, which Marguerite spent looking at the passing streets and telling herself, with more firmness than should have been necessary, that what had happened at the concert was nothing. A pleasant conversation, a slightly unusual man in a room full of usual ones. It meant nothing, and would come to nothing, and she would continue receiving the Duc de Montclair with the careful and considered openness she had been practicing for 3 months. She believed this, for approximately 4 days. Lucien Armand de Montclair was the second son of the late Duc de Montclair, which in the France of his birth and upbringing meant something very specific. It meant that his brother had the title, the estates, the weight of obligation, the expectation of producing an heir, and managing 300 years of accumulated responsibility. It meant that Lucien had, in comparison, almost nothing, which had turned out, once he stopped being ashamed of it, to be one of the better things that had ever happened to him. He was a painter. Not a gentleman who painted as a hobby, not a wealthy amateur with a studio in his townhouse and opinions about technique. A painter who took it seriously, who had studied in Rome for 4 years and in Florence for 2, and had come back to Paris with the specific and unfashionable intention of doing it as his actual life. He sold work occasionally to people who had heard of him through the right conversations. He had a studio on the Ile Saint-Louis that smelled permanently of linseed oil and turpentine and the particular kind of productive chaos that belongs to people who are inside something too large for tidiness. He was, in the terms the Faubourg Saint-Germain used for such assessments, not a good match. He had a modest allowance from the Montclair estate, enough to live on if he lived carefully, which he did. He had his brother's name, which opened doors, and his own reputation, which was not yet large enough to open the same doors on its own. He had no title, no estates, no prospects of the kind that mothers of eligible daughters considered meaningful. He had also spent 6 years watching his brother be the duck, watching the weight of it, the way it shaped every conversation and every decision, the way Armand moved through the world with the constant awareness of what was owed and what was expected and what could not be set aside, and had come to understand that what he had always thought of as deprivation was actually a kind of freedom. He was responsible for himself, nothing more. It was both less and more than it sounded. He had noticed Marguerite de Bressac long before the concert, as it happened. He had heard his brother speak of her since April, and had formed a picture from the words, attentive, intelligent, self-possessed, recently widowed, cautious about the future. He had thought she sounded like a person his brother deserved, which was genuine and meant well. He had not thought anything else about her. Then he saw her at the concert, standing at the window with the evening light on her face, and she was already half smiling at something her companion had said, and the smile was not the social one, not the polite, managed expression that people wore at these events, but something private and quick, gone almost as soon as it arrived, and he had thought, there is the actual person underneath the careful one. And he had walked toward her because the view of the fountain was genuinely good, and he had wanted to see it, and also because he was not, despite 6 years of improving himself on the question, always entirely capable of not doing what he wanted. He had talked to her for 7 minutes before the music began, 7 minutes in which she had been direct and a little dry and not at all deferential, and had taken the observation about his brother with a steadiness that told him she was not naive about what she was considering, and had looked at him when he spoke with the particular quality of attention that meant she was actually listening rather than waiting. He had gone home afterward and stood in his studio for a long time in front of a half-finished canvas without seeing it. He had then sat down and had a very stern and thorough conversation with himself about his brother and about loyalty and about the fact that there was no version of what he was thinking that was not a problem, and he had arrived at the conclusion that nothing had happened and nothing would happen because he was going to make certain of it, and that was the end of it. He believed this. He was also wrong. They encountered each other, as people do when a city decides to be inconvenient, with a regularity that neither of them had planned, and neither of them could reasonably avoid. Paris in the summer of 1819 was not a large city in the ways that mattered. Its social world was a series of overlapping circles, and anyone who moved in the same circles would find themselves, with some frequency, in the same rooms. The second encounter was at the Louvre, where Marguerite went on a Tuesday morning with no particular companion, because she had decided that one of the freedoms of her new life was going to museums alone, when she felt like it. She was standing in front of a Poussin landscape, looking at it with the focused attention of someone who is trying to understand something rather than simply appreciate it, when a voice beside her said, "You're looking at the middle distance." She did not startle. She had heard his step. "The light in it," she said. "It doesn't behave the way light usually behaves in these landscapes. It's coming from the wrong direction." A pause. "Yes," he said. "Poussin does that sometimes. Deliberately." He was more interested in what the light meant than where it was coming from. She looked at him briefly, then back at the painting. He had paint on his right hand today. Different hand. And what does it mean here? He studied it. She was aware, without looking at him directly, of the quality of his attention, the way he looked at the painting, the way she looked at books, with the combination of pleasure and analysis that belongs to people for whom thinking and feeling are not separate activities. "Uncertainty," he said at last. "The landscape is beautiful, but the light source is unstable. You can't be sure whether it's morning or evening, whether things are beginning or ending." Poussin was painting a feeling, not a scene. She turned to look at him then. He was looking at the painting still, not at her. "That is a more interesting answer than I expected," she said. He glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth moved. "You have low expectations of painters." "I have calibrated expectations of men at parties who mention technique," she said. "That's fair," he said. "Technique is often what people mention when they don't have anything more interesting to say." They moved through 4 more rooms. It was not planned. It was the natural progression of 2 people who were looking at the same things and found they kept arriving at the same places, and who were both too honest to pretend this was not happening. They argued about a David that she thought was magnificent, and he thought was magnificent in a way that was also slightly cold, and she said cold was not a defect in a painting about duty, and he said it was when the painter could have used the same composition to say something true about the cost of duty, rather than simply the fact of it, and she considered this, and said he might have a point. He offered to buy her coffee at a cafe near the museum afterward, and she said yes before she had quite decided to, and they sat at a small table on the pavement in the July heat, and talked for another hour about painting and history, and what Paris had been like during the Empire, which he remembered as a boy, and she remembered differently as a girl, and at the end of it, she walked home alone, feeling the particular discomfort of someone who has just spent 2 hours being entirely herself, in the company of a person she should not find so easy to be herself with. She received the duck that evening at the Rue du Bac. He was, as always, attentive and intelligent, and spoke to her with the careful warmth of a man who was doing everything right. She liked him. She genuinely liked him. And she sat across from him in her drawing room, and listened and contributed and smiled. And underneath all of it, something was wrong in the way that things are wrong when a person knows exactly what it is, and is choosing not to look directly at it. She did not tell Hélène about the Louvre. Hélène found out, because Hélène always found out, and said nothing about it, which was worse than if she had said something. The summer moved forward in the way that Parisian summers moved, all heat and light and the long golden evenings that made the city look like a painting of itself. Marguerite received the duck. She attended dinners and concerts and afternoons on the river, with the various arrangements of people who made up their social world. She was, by any external measure, a woman who had her life sensibly in hand. She saw Lucien 8 times between July and September. Each time was in a context that was either public or entirely explainable, and each time they talked in the way they had talked at the concert and the Louvre, directly, without performance, about things that actually interested them, with the easy disagreement of people who are not afraid of each other's opinions. He never said anything that could not have been said in front of his brother. She never did either. There was nothing to point to. There was no moment where either of them had done anything wrong, and yet she knew. She had known, if she was honest, and she was trying to be honest, was becoming better at it, since approximately the salmon comment on the first night. She had known the way you know a thing that you are not ready to know, that you keep in peripheral vision, because looking at it directly would require you to do something about it. She was not sure what to do about it. That was the difficulty. The duck had not yet proposed formally, though she understood it was coming. She had not accepted. She had not refused. She was in the in-between, which was a place she was beginning to understand she could not occupy indefinitely. The crisis arrived, as crises tend to do, not as a single event, but as an accumulation of small things that finally reached a weight the situation could not hold. It was a letter, first. Not to her, a letter she was not supposed to see, and would not have seen except that she arrived at Montclair House on a Saturday afternoon for a small gathering, and was shown to the wrong salon by a flustered footman, and had 10 seconds alone in the library before the mistake was corrected, during which she saw, on the desk, a letter in Lucien's handwriting, open, the salutation visible. She did not read it. She had 10 seconds, and she was not the kind of person who read other people's letters, and she left the room without moving toward the desk. But in those 10 seconds, she saw the handwriting, that particular handwriting, quick and slightly irregular and entirely characteristic, and felt something in her chest that clarified everything she had been refusing to clarify for 2 months. She spent the rest of that afternoon with the Duck's guests in the Duck's drawing room, drinking tea and being pleasant, and left early with a headache that was real. She sat in her own drawing room at the Rue du Bac until midnight, alone, with no book and no candle, except the one she'd lit herself and let burn down without reading anything. She thought about the Duck, about his kindness, his intelligence, the care with which he had approached her. She thought about what a life with him would look like. Good, she believed. Genuinely good. Better than her first marriage, by every measure she could apply. She thought about Lucien, about the Louvre and the Poussin, and the thing he had said about light that was unstable, about the 8 meetings that had contained nothing wrong and had nevertheless contained everything that mattered, about the fact that she had been more herself in those 8 incidental conversations than she had been in 3 months of deliberate courtship. She thought about what was right and what she wanted, and the distance between them, and the cost of each. She thought, for a long time, about honesty, about what she owed the Duke and what she owed herself, and whether those 2 things could be reconciled without someone being hurt. They could not. Someone was going to be hurt. The only question was who and how much, and whether the hurt would be the clean kind that heals or the dull, buried kind that doesn't. She decided before midnight. Then she slept better than she had in 2 months, which told her it was the right decision, even though right and easy were not, in this case, the same thing. She went to see the Duke the following morning. He received her in his study, which was unusual for a morning call, and she thought that he was a man who took things as they came, rather than requiring them to conform to social convention, which was one of the things she had always liked about him. He offered coffee. She declined. She sat down in the chair across from his desk and looked at him directly, because she had decided that the least she owed him was to be direct. She said, "I have something to tell you that is going to be difficult to say and difficult to hear, and I want you to know that I am not saying it carelessly." He was very still. He was a man who, when he was listening seriously, went entirely still, and she had always noticed it, and now she was grateful for it. "Go on," he said. She told him, not everything, not the Louvre, not the specific accumulated weight of 8 conversations, not the letter she had not read. She told him that in the course of the last months, she had come to understand that her feelings were not what they ought to be, that she admired and respected him, genuinely, and that this conversation cost her something because she meant those things, and that she would not be doing right by him to continue when she knew the truth of her own heart. She did not say his brother's name. She did not know if he would guess it or not. She owed him the truth of what she felt, but she did not owe him a name he had not asked for and could not unhear once given. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. She could not read his face precisely, could see, as she had always been able to see with him, the controlled surface and only the edges of what was underneath. "I appreciate your honesty," he said at last. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. "Don't be," he said, and she heard something in it, something that was not quite relief, not quite resignation, but something between them that she would have called, if she had to name it, recognition. "I knew," he said, "that I had not quite—" He stopped, tried again. "I have not been uncertain of my own feelings. I have been uncertain of yours. I thought time would resolve it. Perhaps I was wrong to think so." He looked at her with the calm composure that was entirely his own. "You are being honest, which I would rather have from you than a pleasant performance. So, thank you." She left Montclair House on the Place Vendôme, feeling both lighter and hollower than she had expected, which was the precise feeling of having done the right, difficult thing, as opposed to the easy, wrong one. She walked home along the river. The Seine was silver and flat in the August morning, and the city smelled of bread and stone, and the particular warm smell of summer Paris. She walked slowly, which she did not usually do, and thought about what came next. She was not going to Lucien. That was not what this was. She had not ended the courtship because she expected anything, had not assumed, had not planned, had not decided that what existed between them in 8 public conversations was something he felt as she did, or would want to act on even if he did. She had ended it because the alternative was dishonesty, and she was done with that. What happened next was not something she could arrange or plan or decide in advance. She would simply have to let it be whatever it was. Lucien found out, as these things always circulate in a world of interconnected drawing rooms, within the week. He found out from his brother, who told him with the composed directness of a man delivering difficult news and wanting it done cleanly. The duck said that the Countess de Bressac had withdrawn from the understanding between them, that she had done so honestly and well, and that he was not significantly distressed, which Lucien looked at closely and decided was true. "Are you all right?" Lucien asked. "Yes," Armand said. "I think I had understood for some time that something was not quite as I wished it. She has simply said it before I had to." He looked at his brother with the careful steadiness he had brought to everything since he was 12 years old, and became the duck in manner, if not yet in fact. "Do you know why?" And Lucien met his gaze. He had a choice in this moment, and he knew it, and he made it without hesitation, because the alternative was to lie to his brother, which he had never done in his life. "Not with certainty," he said. "I think I may be part of it. I don't know. Nothing has happened." The silence was long. "Nothing has happened," Armand repeated. "No, I give you my word." Another silence. Lucien waited. He had always found his brother's pauses difficult to sit inside. They were never empty, always working, and you rarely knew what would come out the other side. "She is a good woman," Armand said finally. "Yes," Lucien said. "And you are not a dishonest man," his brother said. "Whatever you are not that." "No," Lucien said. Armand looked out the window for a moment, at the courtyard with the fountain their mother had been right about since 1802. "I am not going to tell you what to do," he said. "You are 30 years old. You have never needed me to tell you what to do. You've simply needed me to be wrong about it, so you had something to push against." The corner of his mouth moved. "Don't make me regret this conversation." Lucien understood what was being said, what was being given. He understood that it was a considerable thing, and he would not diminish it by pretending otherwise. "I won't," he said. He came to the Rue du Bac on a Thursday morning, without sending a note ahead, which was irregular and somewhat presumptuous and entirely characteristic. Her maid showed him into the small sitting room at the front of the house, and Marguerite came downstairs to find him standing at the window with his hands in his pockets, which was also characteristic, and which made something settle in her chest that had been moving in the wrong direction for 2 months. "You came without warning," she said. "I didn't want to give you time to decide not to receive me," he said. "That is quite honest." "I'm trying to be," he said. "I'm not always successful, but I'm making a particular effort today." She sat down and he sat down, across from each other in the small room, and she thought, this is different from the salon and the Louvre and the café and all the public careful spaces they had moved through together. This was her house. This was Thursday morning. This was the actual thing. "My brother told me," he said. "I know he would," she said. "I didn't tell him your name. I want you to know that." "He guessed," Lucien said. "He's very perceptive. Also, I was apparently not as careful as I thought I was." He looked at her with the dark, honest eyes. "I've been trying to be careful. I want you to know that too. I did not want to be the reason for something I had no right to be the reason for." "You weren't the reason," she said. "You were the clarity." He was quiet for a moment. "There is something I want to say to you," he said, "and I want to say it correctly, which means I want to say it slowly, so please be patient with me." "I'm patient," she said. "I know you are," he said. "I've been watching you be patient for 2 months." He looked at his hands for a moment, the ones with the paint, always some paint, always the slight evidence of the life he had chosen over the easier one. "I don't have the title. I have a modest income, and a studio that smells terrible, and a reputation that is not yet large enough to be useful, and a family name that opens doors, but nothing behind those doors that belongs to me, except what I've made myself." He paused. "I am telling you this not to diminish what I'm about to say, but because I want you to know exactly what it consists of, and not to feel that I have hidden anything." "Lucien," she said. "I'm not finished," he said. "I have been in love with you since the Poussin, which I am aware was the second time we met, and is therefore unreasonably fast. But I am trying to be honest, and that is what is true. I have spent 6 weeks being very disciplined about it, and I am not sure I am any better at discipline than I am at painting, which is to say, I can do it, but it costs me considerably." Marguerite looked at him across the small sitting room on the Rue du Bac, in the Thursday morning light, with the particular quality of attention she had always given him, the kind that meant she was actually listening, actually there, not performing being there. "Since the Poussin," she said. "The unstable light," he said. "Morning or evening, beginning or ending. I recognized something." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the Rue du Bac was going about its Thursday morning business, indifferent and alive. "I have been in love with you," she said carefully, "since you told me the salmon was better than it looked, which was the first night, which is faster than the Poussin, and therefore unreasonably faster than you, which I find slightly embarrassing." He looked at her. The real smile arrived, the unplanned one, the one she had been watching for without admitting she was watching for it. "The salmon," he said. "The salmon," she confirmed. "That is the least romantic origin story I have ever heard," he said. "I am a practical woman," she said. "I respond to good information." He stood up and crossed the small room, and she stood as well, because she was not the kind of person who sat and waited for things to come to her, and when he reached her, he stopped with the correct and careful distance of a man who is not going to take what has not been given, and held out his hand. She looked at the hand. At the paint near the knuckle, different hand today, always some paint, the permanent evidence of a life taken seriously. She took it. He held her hand with both of his, which was all it was, just that, just the two of them, standing in the Thursday morning light, in her small sitting room, with Paris outside, and the whole unreasonable future ahead of them. "I should tell you," he said, "that my brother he was not unkind about it. He is a good man." "I know he is," she said. "I will always be sorry to have hurt him." "Yes," he said. "And he knows that, I think," he said. He stopped, smiled slightly at the memory. "He said you were too honest to make a good liar, and he had known it from the beginning, which I believe was his way of saying he forgave you before you'd done anything that needed forgiving." Her eyes went warm. "He is better than most people know," she said. "Yes," Lucien said, "he is." They stood like that for another moment, hands linked, the morning moving quietly around them. Then she said, "Your studio, does it really smell that badly?" "Terribly," he said. "You would hate it in August." "I would like to see it," she said. "Now?" he said. "When you're ready," she said. "I'm not in a hurry." "I've recently learned that I am more patient than I thought." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the thing she had been trying not to see since the concert at Montclair House, the thing that was too large for sideways glances, that required looking at directly, the same thing she knew was in her own face, the unreasonable, inconvenient, entirely real thing. "Thursday next," he said. "I'll be finished with what I'm working on by then." "Thursday next," she agreed. They were not immediately easy. They were not the kind of couple who found everything simple just because they had found each other, which would have been a poor use of two people of their particular characters. They argued, regularly, about painting and politics, and the correct way to spend a Sunday, and whether his studio needed to be organized, or whether the chaos was functional, a question on which they held irreconcilable positions that they revisited with some enjoyment every few months. He showed her the studio on a Thursday, as promised, and she stood in the middle of it in her best autumn dress and looked at the canvases stacked against the walls and the light coming through the large north-facing windows, and said, "It does smell terrible." "I told you," he said. She looked at the painting on the easel. It was the beginnings of something, a figure by a window, the figure not yet resolved, just the light falling through glass onto a form that was still being found. "What is this going to be?" she asked. He came to stand beside her and looked at it for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's usually where I start, with the light. The person comes later." She thought about that, about the unstable light in the Poussin, morning or evening, beginning or ending, about the way she had spent 2 years deciding what she wanted from the world, now that she was permitted to want things, about the way certainty comes not all at once, but in gradual and accumulating degrees, like light changing through the hours of a day. They married in the winter, quietly, in the Montclair family chapel on an estate in Burgundy, where the snow was thick on the ground and the light was white and precise, and came from exactly the right direction. The Duc de Montclair was present, which had required some conversations and some time, and a particular evening in the autumn when Lucien and Armand sat together in the library at Montclair House and spoke with the honesty that only brothers can manage, the kind that goes below the surface because the surface has never been where they actually live. Armand said, at the end of that conversation, "Be good to her. She deserves someone who sees her." "I know," Lucien said. "You always could see things," his brother said. "It is your greatest gift and your most tiresome quality." Lucien laughed. Armand smiled, and it was the real one, the one he didn't often show, and Lucien thought, "We are all right. We are going to be all right." He was right. Marguerite became, in the years that followed, a person she had been trying to find ever since her first marriage ended, and she realized she did not entirely know who she was. She had always been intelligent and composed and capable of managing things well. She became, in addition, someone who laughed more than she used to, someone who had opinions about painting and was not quiet about them, someone who stood in a studio that smelled of linseed oil on Tuesday mornings and told a painter when his light was wrong, and was right about it often enough that he had stopped arguing and started listening, which she considered one of the finer achievements of her life. Lucien painted her, eventually. Several times, none of them quite finished, because he kept seeing something new. He kept starting again. She found this the most accurate thing about him, the most characteristic, the most utterly true, the refusal to settle for a version of something when the real thing was still becoming itself. The Duc de Montclair married, the following autumn, a composed and capable woman from Bordeaux who had no patience for sentiment and considerable talent for managing large estates, and who told him, on the occasion of their third dinner together, that she found him almost impossibly cautious and intended to do something about it. He found this alarming and then, in the way of a man whose heart had been bruised enough to learn from it, decided that alarming was possibly what he had needed all along. They were, as it turned out, extremely well matched. Marguerite heard this and felt, without guilt, the particular satisfaction of someone who has done an accidental good. She had not freed Armand de Montclair for some other woman. She had simply told the truth, and the truth had made space for what was actually possible, which turned out to be better for everyone than the careful and comfortable thing she had nearly chosen instead. She stood at the window of the Ile Saint-Louis studio one October morning, a year after the wedding, watching the Seine go silver in the early light, and thought about what the Poussin had meant. Beginning or ending, morning or evening, the unstable light. She had thought, when Lucien said it, that it meant uncertainty. She thought now that she had been wrong, or not wrong exactly, but incomplete. The unstable light did not mean uncertainty about what was happening. It meant that what was happening could not be reduced to one thing. It was both morning and evening. It was always both. She looked at her husband, who was standing at the easel with his back to her, working in the early light, head slightly inclined the way it was when he was deep in something, entirely present, in the way that people are entirely present when they are doing the thing they are actually for. She thought, yes. This is the actual thing, not the careful version, the actual thing. Outside, Paris moved, the river moved, the light moved across the water in the way that light moves when no one has told it where to come from, freely, from all directions at once, making everything it touches briefly extraordinary. And so ends tonight's tale. The Countess of Paris fell in love with the Duke's younger brother. A story about a woman who spent 2 years learning what she wanted and then had the courage to admit it, even when admitting it cost something real. A story about the younger brother who had nothing but himself and turned out to be more than enough. A story about the older brother who was a good man in the most genuine sense, not the man she needed, but good enough to let her go with grace, and brave enough to love again on different terms. And most of all, a story about the difference between the life that looks right from the outside and the life that actually is right, lived from the inside, with the full and inconvenient and extraordinary weight of who you actually are. And now, our question for you tonight, the one we want you to answer in the comments below. If you were Marguerite, would you have had the courage to tell the truth to the Duke, to walk away from something good because you had found something true, Or would you have stayed and told yourself that good was enough and hoped that love would come with time? Tell me what you would do if it were you in that story. We read every single comment and love hearing from you more than you know. If tonight's tale moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to Tales of Whispering Hearts so you never miss a new story. Share this with someone who has ever had to choose between what is comfortable and what is real. Until next time, may you always have the courage to choose the actual thing. This has been Tales of Whispering Hearts.